Hello, I'm Jonathan Stark, and welcome to Inside the Brackets. Today we're getting down to business and talking with developers about their real-world experiences building apps for the enterprise. Joining us today are Eduardo Abe, software engineer from the IBM Worklight team, Nis Boy, Vice President of SAP User Interfaces, Bill Giard, Principal Engineer of Intel IT, and Abe Elias, Chief Technology Officer, Sencha. Let's start by talking about what makes enterprise applications different.
So enterprise applications differ from the consumer environment in a couple of ways. The first very specific implication really centers around the communication that those applications have to big back-end systems, whether they're ERP transactions, human HR systems, Salesforce systems. So you end up finding a lot more communication between the back-end systems and the front-end systems, which drives a lot of focus on security and authentication and performance. And so in the enterprise, we end up having a global reach, and we end up talking to many systems together. And so that ends up shaping our strategy around how do we design apps that can work globally and work and connect to a number of systems.
And Nis Boy, what are some of the challenges that your customers are facing that are specific to the enterprise?
We were discussing all that and also discussing the question about consumer-grade user experience. Our customers actually asked us not to get carried away with this consumer-grade level, bringing in game experience. They basically told us that people are getting paid to get their job done, so please deliver software which makes the people efficient and effective.
So fewer bells and whistles, so to speak.
Absolutely.
I would say that the enterprise development and strategy for apps significantly different now than it was even 5 years ago. It used to be in enterprise IT where, if you had more functionality or lower cost, that would be the major decision vectors that would drive your solution. That's significantly changed. We're seeing our customers, even within our company, saying, I will pay more for less functionality if the experience is better, the performance is better. So they're getting really crystal clear around give me things that are of high value that helps me be productive and fast.
Hey, what's your take on that?
So from our standpoint, what we're hearing from the enterprises is that they're adopting, or they're more open to adopting BYOD policies where end users are dictating the devices that they wish to use inside of the enterprise. So that presents a whole new set of challenges for the enterprise that used to have a corporate-owned device and they handed you your BlackBerry and that's the device that you got. So now the choice for the end users has opened up, whether it be through a corporate-owned program of pick your device or bring your device. So how enterprises tackle the challenge of deploying an application across a plethora of operating systems is the challenge that we hear loud and clear from the enterprise.
I agree with that completely. I mean, at Intel, really gone are the days where we could design for one specific OS and platform. And the consumerization, the bring your own device, BYOD program has brought over 46,000 consumer devices into Intel, and our users, our employees are demanding that they be productive on those devices. Over 20 different operating systems, and so that is absolutely a reality.
So Nis Boy, you're specifically focused on user interface, yes?
Right.
So can you tell me about what you do at SAP and why you've embraced HTML5 to solve the problems that you're seeing?
At SAP, I'm working with a group who's working on user interface technologies. So over time, we've come up with a couple of UI technologies there, following also different trends and different requirements we had there. And recently, we introduced HTML5. First of all, starting at the great capabilities HTML5 gives us to really build cool-looking user interfaces, being flexible and so on. But over time, there are some key advantages figured out. One of the big advantages, and that probably goes very strongly back to what you just mentioned, is the responsive design. Really having like one design, one implementation, which can run across devices. The next very good advantage for us is that it's platform independent. Platform independent, we talked about the device that can be a platform, that can be the operating system, that is also a platform, or the browser system. But when we look at enterprise system, we also have to look at the backend, and I guess you also want to talk about that. And therefore, with HTML5, it is a pure client-side rendering. The good thing is that we can really deliver a fully decoupled user interface, and by the right decoupling from the backend, we can put it on-premise, on demand, on any database, and so on.
Okay. Hey, what's your sort of story in that?
I think the discussion as to whether or not you should use HTML5 for the enterprise or not use HTML5 for the enterprise, I think that conversation is done and over with. Yeah. I think everyone says, hey, there's componentries out there like Sencha Touch, SAP UI 5, that can help get you to a user experience that works well on these touch-based interfaces. The question now has shifted more towards how do I deploy this application? Because if you take a look at how you deploy an HTML application on the desktop, it's just a URL. But when you take a look at actual mobile applications, we have this notion that you have to take them and wrap them up, package them up as a native container, and then redistribute them to the mobile device. There's a movement to take this HTML5, this pristine technology, and then package it inside of a native shell. And now the question is, well, I have this native application, how do I deploy it to these applications, or to these mobile devices that wish to consume it? So naturally you might think, well, I'll just put it on the consumer app store. Well, for many enterprises that doesn't work, right? So they go ahead and they mimic that environment and they create an enterprise app store. And they MDM your phone, right, so that they can push you these applications out. So what's happened is that HTML5 as a technology, which was the simple refresh on your browser and you got the latest update, has now moved to a very native paradigm of how you do application lifecycle management. So we took a step back and we said, we don't think that that's the right approach for HTML5 applications, for them to be deployed using native shell containers. Right. That notion, we think, is pretty arcane.
Sure. So Bill, what's your, I'm sure you have an opinion about that.
Yeah. So I would say we started with, our multi-platform journey, like most, started as a mobile journey, which is, create native applications, and then we start with the prevalence, whether it's iOS, Objective-C, Java, Android, yada yada, down the pike. We've evolved way past the package apps and deploy them. We do that in some cases for performance reasons. The harsh reality is, in the enterprise, 80% of our applications are run on the desktop via HTML4 browser-based apps. We have 1,400 apps, 80% of those are browser-based ones that don't require installation. What we're seeing is that most of our applications are deploying browser-based solutions and the same solution for the desktop, for the tablet, and the phone, and giving them access. Now, we'll put little wrapper hooks around, can I launch that immediately from the desktop? Because the user still expects an icon in some cases, whether you launch into an app store or not. But for the most part, we're going past the package native apps, past the give me an enterprise class app store. The big thing that I worry about as I'm deploying a solution is, does my user have the ability to render HTML5 performant apps? And so we really are seeing a key shift back towards web standard runtime environments.
So I'll tell you where that breaks down.
Okay.
All right? So there's three areas where I think it breaks down. One is data in transit, when you have to go ahead and connect to these back-end systems. So when you have to connect to a back-end system, usually there's a VPN involved of some sort. So if I'm away from the office and I need access to my environment, the way that we currently today deploy these applications, whether it be packaged or even in a browser, is we say, let's install a layer 3 IPsec VPN on the phone. So what happens there in that particular scenario is, when that device connects to that VPN, it's not only that application now that has access to that enterprise app back end, it's all of the other applications that sit on that phone. And some of them might be malicious in nature, right? Some might have malware, and some might be interrogating the network.
Let me address the first point, right? So like most companies, we've addressed tunnel in, get me a dedicated VPN, type in another password, right? Open up the whole phone. And so that's certainly one vector we did. We've done the native app. Where we've evolved to now is using things like McAfee Pledge to go get us a one-time password that authenticates through a very specific firewall gateway, and then tunnels in. Similar approach, but not giving the whole access to the phone, but giving access to a very specific browser session.
And that particular thing is sort of platform agnostic approach?
Well, no, so it's hard to get away from complete platform agnostic. I mean, even in any runtime environment, you're going to have to, at some point, understand what are the device-specific feature sets. Am I leveraging the runtime environments? And authentication, you still have to have for the major OSs some level of trust. And so, it ends up being, pretty close to platform agnostic, but at some level we're finding there's security checks that we have to be aware of. They say, is it a jailbroken OS?
Yeah.
Is it,
where you can't check that
located?
inside of the consumer browser, right?
No.
So, right.
Yeah, so you need to augment,
right.
The browser
Yeah.
with some level.
So that's where I think for the enterprise, using a consumer browser is not really a viable choice. So because the second reason is probably even more powerful, and that's called data at rest. So when you actually take data outside of your organization and you store it on your device, the enterprise is most concerned about having data loss. So if that device is lost and falls into the wrong hands, can someone easily get access to that information? Well, on today, the consumer browser, you have local storage, IndexedDB, WebSQL, all of that is stored in the clear, including the file API. So what enterprises are looking for is having the ability to go ahead and having an encrypted store that they can make sure that the keys that are being used are not available on the device, so that if the device is lost, that they have access, that the person who is trying to compromise the device doesn't get access to that. And the consumer browser today, unfortunately, does not give enterprises the comfort of having their data at rest. And then the last reason is trying to make sure that they have a single identity for accessing these applications. So today, if you're trying to use a consumer browser, chances are, unless you've instituted an enterprise SSO solution, having the ability to log into all of these different applications and having a seamless user experience as I go from my email to my ERP system back into my CRM, having one way of accessing this application is something that's also important to the enterprises, and managing that identity once as opposed to managing 3 separate identities.
So here's where that breaks down.
Go ahead.
So
what I want to do is have a bigger security conversation.
So my job at Intel is to give software solutions back to our 100,000 plus employees. We have over 1,400 applications that we have to deploy to the enterprise. And you're right, we have to worry about security, we have to worry about authentication and user experience. The challenge, so number one, the harsh reality is most of our applications don't have to store data at rest, right? In HTML4, they don't take advantage of that. Now, you do have to protect the data in the session transit, so that's absolutely still, right, it's a fine line between am I actually storing it on the local storage system or do I have it in my browser session? And you have to handle the sign-on. The problem that I worry about is do I have applications from my vendor or from my internal community team that are written to work for Spaces, right? How do I recode that such that it works on that implementation or Worklight's implementation or UI5, right? And so what I worry about is how do I give an environment such that I can move my entire ecosystem to work on any platform and not commit to any industry or vertical framework? Because my experience over the last 20 years at Intel in supporting IT applications, developing those, frameworks live and die. And whether you pick Power Builder, Silverlight, Flash, pick your favorite framework. They live and die.
You raised a very important point, and that is keeping up the flexibility. First of all, flexibility on how to distribute the application. As I said, if you're inside the firewall, people are working in the company with their browser, with their desktop device. You don't need that. You're very safe with that. So you need to have the same application probably being deployed just through a normal HTML browser. If you're going outside the firewall with devices you might not even know, then you're fully right. Then you need something secure. But I think overall, when we look to this kind of outlook where we want to go next, I think the key to being future-proof is the decoupling, really decoupling back-end from front-end, having a fully decoupled front-end, but having a reliable back-end decoupling. New devices come in, maybe in 2 years we'll be wearing Google glasses and have other things to look at there, and you'll still be probably looking at the same data, still supporting the same processes.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue from very specific security type of considerations to just the backend in general. So what are Eduardo, what are the specific backend challenges that you think are specific to enterprise that maybe consumer application developers don't have to worry about as much?
Usually when you build a consumer application, you'll be talking to either a cloud or a backend, but it's usually a unique source. And when you're building for enterprise, you never know. You may be reusing some services that are already there. Some services may be external. Some services may be internal, and you don't want to externalize them, so you need some security to access that. So you need to maybe get a piece of data here, another piece of data there, mash them up, and return to your device in an efficient way so that you don't consume a lot of bandwidth.
I think definitely having standards on how you connect to the back end has emerged. In the past, you might be pulling a CSV file off of a mainframe and trying to do some data translation either on the client or on the server. But I think the industry is moving towards OData. We have an SAP OData connector that we've worked with SAP on. There's REST endpoints, there's JSON endpoints. So there's many different ways that data can be consumed, and I think it's up to the framework to be able to allow developers to consume the data in whichever form that's out there.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, services and understanding, I think one of the other unique parts about the enterprise is you're handed sets of interfaces and services, right? Now we want them to be RESTful. That's the standard we're driving, right? JSON data constructs coming back, right? But the reality of the enterprise is you've got thousands of APIs and that you have to connect to. And so I think certainly back-end services is absolutely the strategy, and RESTful services.
So I think, the story that I'm hearing coming out of all of this is that there are tons of very specific concerns for the enterprise, not the least of which is security. Also that flexibility is absolutely critical, and that a great way to sort of get that flexibility is to adhere to standards as much as possible.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. The challenge though is that web standards are great, and they're there to give future-proof comfort for developers to use them. But the experiences that you can create with them today, are limited to input tags, CSS styling around boxes, and maybe some JavaScript scrolling. The componentry that end users are accustomed to are infinite list scrolling. They're interested in editable grids. They're looking at componentry that doesn't exist in a very basic form as a web standard. So that's why you have jQuery UI components, that's why you have SAP UI, that's why you have Sencha Touch, is so that the developers can go ahead and create those compelling interfaces, because on top of web standards, because the web standard as it stands today doesn't give you an editable grid or a type ahead combo box. That's where we think that there is a need for actually helping developers bring about this business productivity and user experiences that are compelling to the end.
Yeah, the exciting thing about our industry right now is that the level of innovation is off the charts, right? I mean, the amount of people extending web standards, the number of changes going on in the JavaScript libraries, the frameworks coming out is really moving at a fast pace, which for us says, hey, whatever we defined 12 months ago is probably different than what we would define today, which will be different than we define even 6 months from now. So how do we keep pace with that, as opposed to taking the traditional IT governance route, thou shalt use this framework? How do you keep up to pace and use those and leverage those? And that's where it's actually even encouraging, right? You see all of the framework solutions here at this table, and they're all saying similar stories around web standards, extend, make sense of it, don't lock yourself in. The one piece of advice, if you think you've got it figured out and that's going to be your 5-year strategy, you probably don't have it figured out. It's not going to be your 5-year strategy. Right?
All right, so I want to wrap by asking a question about red herrings. Now, in enterprise application development, are there things that you're seeing your customers get distracted by, that aren't really driving business value, but they're super excited about, like a 60 frames per second page sliding animation, instead of worrying about sort of abstracting their front end from their back end, just for an example?
I see some enterprise customers, they put a lot of effort and focus on having a very pristine UI, where what they actually need is a functional UI. It doesn't mean it has to be crappy. It has to be functional. In the end of the day, they have to focus. They're building an application for the enterprise to save their employees time. So whether it is using infinite scroll or just pagination, if it's saving employees time, it's a successful application. And I see that sometimes they get lost a little bit on track, trying to pursue the gaming-like feeling on an enterprise application.
Okay. Bill, what about you guys?
So I think the big red herring is what's my technology roadmap for supporting my users in the future. Whether I pick a HTML versus native framework, a Meep platform, etc. The reality is the enterprise in most businesses run on HTML4 today, and then augment with native solutions. And the technology decisions that you have to pick, do I have to go HTML5? Do I pick a Meep framework? Do I pick something else? My advice is, stay away from the technology focus. And, much like you've heard at the table, really focus on what is the web standards going on, the web runtime environments. Because you can get your HTML4 environment and even do that on multiple platforms. On HTML5 makes that better. By no means am I saying go develop HTML4 applications, but don't get enamored by what's my technology that I need to pick and commit to. Be flexible to adapting and evolving that as the industry continues to adapt and evolve.
All right, that's all the time we have today. Thanks to each of our guests, and thanks to you for joining us on Inside the Brackets.